Hello and welcome back to Not Another Bucking Podcast. So glad to have you with us. Really appreciated everybody who subscribed to the first episode last week, whether it was the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever else, or the YouTube channel where we also put the podcast up there with the video component, or just reached out to us about the podcast on Twitter. It's been a labor of love that we've tried to put together for a while now. We're going to, again, like I said last week, continue to just try to get better. We're going to have more guests. We're going to continue to engage, listen to whatever it is that you think, you might want to hear on this podcast. And this week we have the great Romi Bean. She is the CBS Sports, CBS Channel 4 sports anchor in Denver. Has been covering the Broncos for a long time, covering Denver sports for a long time. So really excited to get her insight here in just a little bit, but I just kind of wanted to, touch on some of these things that happened in training camp, the first 4 days that we were out there. Obviously, Sean Payton was the newsmaker, which your head coach creating headlines out of thin air is not something that we see very often, but that's what Sean Payton did when he told Jarrett Bell of USA Today that he thought last year's Broncos coaching staff put together one of the, quote, worst coaching jobs in NFL history. That's how bad it was. In that same article, he leveled criticism at his own, or at the team's own current front office and leadership structure for its role in allowing some of the things that took place to take place. He criticized the Jets for their hype-filled offseason that includes an appearance on Hard Knocks that I don't think they asked for. And then Sean Payton came back a couple days or 2 days later when he spoke to the media again and said that he had regret, that it was a mistake, that he stepped in it, that he was still had his Fox hat on and not his coaching hat on, that he was proud of his players for having a quiet offseason. And here is the veteran coach himself, being the one that creates this stir. So kind of calling out his own, hypocrisy in his kind of view for that. I think my personal take on this is I don't think Sean Payton regrets what he said, because he even in his mea culpa, he said, listen, I'm defending my guys. He thinks that his team, that there's been enough of the criticism for 2022 that's in the rearview mirror. And so I think some of that was taken up for those guys, particularly Russell Wilson, who was at the center of all that. But I think there was probably some getting called into the principal's office, so to speak, in terms of, hey, let's not get after our own people that are in this building, right? Like everybody was trying to do the right thing last year. It was just a bad situation that just kind of got out of control and didn't work. And to their credit, they nipped it in the bud, right? Like 15 games, they said, we got to move in some different direction, and then went in a whole new direction when they hired Sean Payton. So, I think it said what it said. That Week 5 game when the Jets come to town in Denver on October 8th with Aaron Rodgers, Nathaniel Hackett, it's going to be fireworks. It's going to be a lot of fun. And the network executives will have Sean Payton to thank for a little bit of a bump. Outside of that, we'll get to the conversation here with Romi. Before we do that, I want to play a clip that I thought was some of the most interesting sound from the first 4 days of training camp, and that is new Broncos outside linebacker Frank Clark, who came to Denver after 4 successful years with the Chiefs. Here's what he had to say about the Chiefs-Broncos rivalry, in which the Chiefs have won 15 straight games.
I wouldn't call it a rivalry, and the rivalry is competitive, true or false. And I'm on the Broncos now, and I've been on the other side, you know what I mean? And we didn't call it a rivalry then. I'm with the Broncos now. Until we become competitive enough, we have to beat the team. We have to win our division. We have to do a few things, not just about the Chiefs. It's things we have to do here. We got to get our own ball together here in order for us to go out there and compete, for us to become one of those factions.
Okay, I am pleased today to welcome our special guest, 2022 Colorado Sportscaster of the Year. You can find her smiling face on the cover of Westward right now. She's the sports anchor at CBS 4 Denver CBS affiliate. Romi, so glad to have you on the Not Another Bucking podcast. Thanks for coming on.
Nick, I'm so bucking excited. I was like, finally, I got my chance. I got my call up. I am pumped.
Well, we're so glad to have you. Well, let's roll right into it, because it has been a crazy week. We were talking at camp that it's been 4 days, feels like 4 weeks. Let's talk about the Frank Clark clip we just listened to in a minute. But what was just like your biggest takeaway of this opening week that somehow made national headlines because of things that were said, quarterbacks running. What was just your biggest takeaway for the first 4 days?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, okay, so two parts. First of all, of course, the Sean Payton bombshell article was just wild. And then it was wild more so that he went there and then he kind of went back. But I think if we take a deep dive into that, I think the reasons he went back I don't think it was this full-on apology. I think that was more of the general manager kind of smoothing things in the facility. I wouldn't be surprised if he went up to the players and said, I still stand by everything that I said, But that was crazy because, again, we've never seen it, and there's been so little access all off season, so that happens. That's wild. But my biggest takeaway, and this is like a very like broad strokes takeaway, Nick, and this is going to sound so simple, but that this is professional football. And you all know, because you have been here covering the Broncos for the last few years, everything, even at camp, it's just, there's efficiency, and it's the little things. It's not just the tempo of practice, but it's what happens in between and how quickly they're getting to other drills, and they're not taking lollygag breaks. It's just being run like a professional organization, and that's such a welcome sight, I think, after everything we've seen and all the different changes, and you just get that sense of stability. I would say that's my overarching take without getting into like any specific player. That was my big thing, which sounds weird. It sounds weird to say, oh, it looks professional.
It makes sense. It makes sense because I think the thing that I've said that the Broncos, their previous 3 head coaches, which all came since 2017, they've come fast and furious. They were all first-time head coaches. Mm-hmm. And even though, our guy, Vic Fangio, has been in the league since the leather helmets, he was still being a head coach for the first time. And those guys are just like really trying to figure out how they want to assemble everything. I'm with you. Like, that's my takeaway with Sean Payton, is that he's done this before. Like, there's a very clear goal, not just with what they want to, where they want to be when the season begins, but like what they're doing every day, the purpose behind everything. I was talking to Adam Troutman today, who had played a couple seasons with Sean Payton in New Orleans. And he talked about how, like, guys, when they would first join a team coached by Sean Payton, sort of asking, like, is this what it's like all the time? He's like, yeah, you'll get used to this. This is your new normal, because they tell him, like, we haven't seen this like at other teams, just in terms of, that cold calculated efficiency with what they're doing, and yet still finding the time to teach. That to me has been noticeable as well. And you mentioned the tempo. Like, I thought it was interesting. The last 2 days, he's had a couple different times where he blows the whistle and just sort of like, motions back to the huddle, and guys go back and basically it's just get out of the huddle quicker, get to the line of scrimmage quicker. I mean, that's what we've seen, is just this like, there's no missing these like little details. You're not allowed to do that.
Yeah. And I think along those same lines, I think he makes the expectations very clear. And I think you can look in hindsight, and probably even while it was happening with Nathaniel Hackett, those expectations were not clear. I think it was probably a similar thing with Vic Fangio, again, because they're just trying to establish who they are and what they want this to look like. And Sean Payton even said it, talking about when that first padded practice is going to come. He's laying down the expectations. He said the key word is clarity of what we expect, so that there's not fights and people aren't getting overexcited. Everything, you use the word calculated, and that can have a negative connotation sometimes, but I think in this sense, it's a positive thing, because these guys know exactly what to expect, and they need that. They need that structure. They need that organization. Ryan Harris said to me a while ago, a long time ago, I was asking him about Sean Payton and about kind of, Nathaniel Hackett being everyone's friends. And as a guy who played in the league, I thought he had a great point. He said, look, when you make it to the NFL, you have enough friends. You want to coach.
Wow. Yeah.
And I was like, man, that just hit so hard. And so I think that's so true. And I think you see that guys like Justin Simmons, who's going in year 8, never made the playoffs. He just wants a coach, man. Doesn't need another buddy. And so that's why I think another reason these guys are so receptive to it, because they're like, okay, this guy's got a vision, steer the ship.
Yeah. Well, I think Justin had a quote like early in the offseason where he said something to the effect of like, I don't really care if you tell me we got to do 4-a-day practices, and that might be like slightly hyperbolic, but I think it was a representation of the way that he feels, right? Like, that's what they have wanted. Like, especially the guys that have been here a long time and just haven't seen that pathway. Is just like, just tell us what to do. And I think that was part of the thing with Sean Payton with this ownership group too, is like last year they come aboard in August and they have a head coach who's been there since February. And I think there were pretty early signs that he was very much still trying to figure out like how this whole being the face of a franchise worked. And I think the Penner Walton ownership group is sort of, I think, self-aware of the fact that they are still trying to establish themselves, to really learn about just the business, the politics, the different things of the NFL. And I think there's a lot of things that shows you they've had a pretty quick education in that regard over the last year, just in the way that they've maneuvered some things. But I think that was part of wanting to get a guy like Sean Payton. Obviously, they had the sit downs, the conversations with Jim Harbaugh too, because it would have been the same thing of like, look, we don't want there to be any sort of doubt. Now, we'll talk a little bit about this. When you get a guy that you're saying, hey, fully in charge, like that comes with some things too. And we experienced some of that this week.
Well, and I think it is because, Greg Penner at the beginning of the week had kind of said, yeah, we talk about some things with Sean, but you got the sense that, Sean is pretty much in charge of the football side of things. And he is in charge of, because there's two aspects to a professional football team. That's the business side and the football side. And obviously, you don't build Walmart by being a bad business guy. So they know what they're doing and they have their work cut out from them on that end. There's so much, that goes into that they want to restructure, people they want to bring in. And I think that in Greg Penner's mind, which is what a smart CEO does, is they delegate. And he has delegated a lot of those football duties to Sean Payton. Now that works out for Sean Payton because that's what he wants. That's what a Jim Harbaugh would have wanted, and I think maybe necessarily those two haven't butted heads, but the article kind of brought to this light that maybe Penner does want to be a little more involved, or maybe not. Maybe he's fine with it, right? But I think everybody's going to be watching that dynamic with him and George Payton with a close eye. And it does seem like whenever they're together, they get along great, right? But you get the sense that Sean Payton is, I keep making the reference like Captain Phillips, like I'm the captain now. Look me in the eyes, And that's how Mike Shanahan was. That's how Bill Belichick is. There's a lot of successful head coaches that are like that, and at the end of the day, if you win, nobody cares. But it will be interesting to see. He certainly won't be giving up a ton of power anytime soon.
No, that's like such a big part of it. And I think for whatever like drawbacks that might come with that, think like little headaches that it causes you, you chose to have a situation in which you don't have to worry about whether the football side is being guided with know-how. Like I think that's the bottom line. And that's what's been very clear these first 4 days is like, there's a very clear delineation of like who's in charge, how things are getting operated. There's a chain of command. And it's just made for a smoother product. Like these practices do just seem quicker based on the way that they're organized. And I think that has been a pretty big departure, particularly from last year. Let's talk about Russ, because that's obviously the big thing that, was a part of that article too, right? Is that, he's defending the guy. But I just want to talk about from what we've seen, obviously just 2 practices. Team periods have been somewhat limited in terms of how much guys are throwing. You're not in pads, where I think offensive linemen are the most disadvantaged group in this because your job is to put your hands places and there's nowhere to put hands. But what just has been your thought of what you've seen out of Russell, even if some of that includes the offseason, OTAs, minicamp, and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think the first thing you look at is physically, which obviously has been just a huge topic. I was laughing when he was at the podium about how many questions he got asked about his weight and people just wanting to know the number on the scale.
This is weird in that way sometimes, right? Like the things that like that you talk about, you do rewind it back and you're just like, okay, what are we covering? What is this?
It was like a weird amount of questions there, okay. But it is such a big topic, and that's because last year, I mean, he looked like a different human being, right? And it was, to me, again, not to take away from what he's done in the offseason, which is a tremendous amount of work, but it kind of fits in with what I said about this is how practice just should be run, right? This is professional football. This is how Russell Wilson should look. Last year was this departure where he decided that he wanted to, kind of take it into his own hands and whatever. And so He looks better physically. He definitely looks more agile. We saw him do, of course, run the 70 yards. He didn't run as much in the final practice of the week, but like the biggest thing I noticed is that the offense, even without pads, is really catered to what's going to help make Russell successful, right? Running heavy offensive tempo, right? Really heavy on the ground game. They brought in these big dogs, Ben Powers, Mike McGlinchey, and Mike McGlinchey hasn't even been out there. Prayers up to him and his family, by the way. But even without that, you can see this line looks so much stronger. The running get backs, you can tell Sean Payton is doing, okay, this is what's going to make Russell Wilson successful. This is what he's been successful in the past. So Russell Wilson to me looks a little bit more, at ease as well, I think. And so he's made some great passes. He's made, a couple, not so great ones of other days. Maybe you give him a B. Maybe I give him a B plus throughout the first four days of camp, I think. But the other piece of it too is I just think Russ, when we talk to him, is much more subdued. He's still got that energy, he's still got that passion. He still kind of, gets into his stories and his motivations and all that stuff. But
journey,
way more subdued version.
Every other sentence.
Yes, and I had somebody ask me, like, subdued, like, does somebody have him, by the cojones kind of subdued? And I was like, I don't think so. I just think for Russ, and I appreciated that he was honest, and he said last year wasn't anything I ever wanted, right? He's embarrassed, and so I think he's focused, but I think he just, to me, looks really settled because of Sean Payton. And then physically, he looks better. I think he looks faster. I think he looks more agile, and I think he's just going to be in a position to succeed. Does he look as fast as he did 5 years ago? No, but he certainly looks faster than last year.
Well, I think you mentioned the word tempo, and I'm so curious with this offense. What I've really been kind of trying to look at is during Sean Payton's tenure in New Orleans, the Saints were always among the league leaders in terms of quickest time from snap to pass, time to throw. They were among the league leaders, and a lot of that is because Drew Brees had one of the quickest releases, and he also had one of the quickest processors in his brain in terms of just making a decision, getting it out. But so much more goes into that than just the quarterback. And Russell Wilson obviously has been a quarterback who his teams finished toward the lower end of time to throw. And a lot of times that's because he's scrambling, and it has served him well a lot of times. But I think one of the things we saw last year, and part of this was injuries, he can't escape guys like those extending plays. He doesn't necessarily have the mobility to extend them to that degree anymore. And so I think it's this balance, right, of like understanding that still has to be a part of who you are, because that's always been, that's how you're built. And he's still fast. He's still agile. He's, when you're a smaller quarterback, that's also sort of one of your benefits, right, is that you're a little bit harder to get a hold of. So those things still have to be a part of it. But it's sort of, I think, understanding like know thyself, right? Like know how much you can and can't still do that. But what I'm curious about is the thing that Adam Troutman told me was like so much of that time to throw is in part the quarterback, but it's also just how quickly you can get to the line of scrimmage, because if you do that, you are putting the defense in a bind. Sean Payton talks about it a lot. We want to attack the defense. Mm-hmm. So and not the other way around where you're on your heels. You want to have them on your heels, and you do that by pushing the tempo up, by blowing the whistle to say we have to get to the line faster. And so it's just going to be interesting to me to see how far Russ comes from this back end of time to throw and sort of meets it in the middle with Sean Payton and what that does for the offense. Because that was the thing last year. Nothing was easy. Yeah. Every single thing that they did on offense looked like they had a 10-pound weight on their back. And part of them, I think, getting some more layups, so to speak, is just quickening the tempo. So for me, that was sort of a positive sign of these first 4 weeks, is that they are moving with more urgency than we saw at any point last year.
Yeah, and I'm with you. And the other point, too, along with that, is they're moving with the tempo, right? And like you said, Sean Payton said they want to stress the defense. They're getting up there. He's getting the ball out quicker. And on top of all that, he knows what he's doing. I mean, how many times last year where it looked like he was running around because he didn't know what the hell he was doing, and whether that was because it wasn't the right play call, right, or Hackett didn't get the call in, or he was audibling it, whatever, right?
There was receivers in the lineup because everybody's hurt,
right? Or people didn't know. There's so many times where looked like so many different members of the offense at different points were confused, and that's why they had so many pre-snap penalties. And it's crazy that it went on all season, but obviously this is a small sample size. Obviously it's not game speed. Obviously it doesn't have pads on, but they're acting with this tempo, and everybody knows where they're supposed to be. Everybody knows where they are. You can tell that they understand where they are at whatever point of, installation and learning the offense they are, and maybe a little bit even more ahead. But they're playing with that tempo, and there's a calm to it because they know what they're doing. And that again plays into Sean Payton putting Russell Wilson into if you want to say into a box a little bit. And I think Russ saying, okay, yeah, that's cool. Let's do it this way.
Yeah. So it's obviously one of the funny things Sean Payton said, well, not funny, but just caught my ear was, he stresses to his coaches, like, we're constantly in evaluation mode, but let's not make judgments on guys, 2 or 3 practices in. So let's keep moving guys. Let's keep having, different players play with different personnel groups with, first, second, third string, whatever it might be. Let's not make snap judgments, but we get to do that. He doesn't get to put that on us. So I'm curious, we talked about some of the positives. Are there any concerns for you that have cropped up, in this early period? Maybe it's things that even existed before this. Any concerns that have originated from what you've seen so far?
Yeah, I mean, my biggest concern still is depth. Specifically, you look up on that defensive front. I think there was a couple times where, depending on matchups, 7-on-7s offense is supposed to win. And look, there were times where the secondary is never a concern. And I will say that you could be even more confident. Same thing in the team period where they just had some great plays. But the offensive line, the power of the offensive line, Ben Powers, has made some holes so big. It's on, Russell Wilson, Javonte Williams could run through together. It's just already. So I love to see that. But going into camp, I was a little concerned about defensive line. Then Nyome Wazirike gets suspended. And now I guess that's the beauty of camp. That's the point of camp, to see who's going to step up. But still waiting for someone to really step up there. I think that's, what does this defensive line look like? We know they've reached out to Shelby Harris, maybe some other people. But so that's kind of the big concern, especially because, Sean Payton even said a quarterback's best friend is run game and good defense. Now we know the secondary is going to be good. What does the front look like? And the same thing goes for outside linebackers. This could be a really strong group. Does Nick Bonito take the next step? I thought he's had some great moments, especially in the final practice on Saturday. I thought he had a great play there. So does he step up? Is Baron Browning healthy? There's questions there. And then, of course, Randy Gregory, right? Is he going to play a full season? Do you pace him out? Do you only play 65% of the snaps? These are things that we don't know, I guess, necessarily in camp. But this is what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the next person who's really going to step up. Is Jonathan Cooper ready to step up and take a bigger role? For me, those are the big areas that I think need the most, that have the most concern, right?
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. It's funny, we spent all off season, dialoguing who they have. You write so many sort of like roster construction type stories in the off season. You talk about it a lot. But there was a time on Thursday, I think, when they had their first or Friday, when they had their first full team practice in front of fans. And you're looking, and they start these 11-on-11 drills. And at one point, you're looking at the front line, and it's Randy Gregory, DJ Jones, Zach Allen, and Frank Clark. And you're like, that's a pretty good 4. That's versatile people who can certainly get off after the passer from the interior, from the edge. You could have Alex Singleton blitzing in the middle of that. That's a good group that I think can also be out on the field and probably stop the run as well. I think Zach Allen's going to be really good against the run. He's just so long and, strong and physical. But then you say, okay, well, what is behind that? That to me is the concern. It's going to be sort of a hold your breath proposition throughout training camp. It's just can they stay healthy? Because they do have the front end talent, I think, is good enough to be in the playoffs. Mm-hmm. And it's why they've overhauled so much of what they've done from a health and player wellness perspective. And Adam Troutman, who worked with Bo Lowry, the new vice president of player health and nutrition, as a rookie, said this guy will make a difference. He just is so locked into everything, every single thing about every single player and knowing their plan. And it's everybody that's been in this building has been well intentioned, but the bottom line is that they just haven't been able to avoid some of these injuries for years now. So that's 100% what it is, because they don't have a lot of depth in the front seven. Jonathan Cooper, I think, has been really good this offseason. But again, he's a depth player, and he's had some of his own injury issues. Baron Browning, we know that he has, some pretty dynamic talent. He's still not out there. We don't know if he'll be ready to start the season or not. Right. So that's what I'm going to be. It's just like a hold your breath thing for really the rest of camp.
But one interesting note on that too is we talk about the health, and it's been crazy. Not even last year was insane, but even going back, quite a few years. But something that to me really stood out in practice was running gassers at the end of practice, conditioning at the end of practice. But it's one of those things where he wants them to be really well conditioned. You even watch like the warm-ups, and they're having them do just kind of like little hops almost that were almost little like Achilles exercises. Just all these little different warm-ups that I haven't seen them do before. And I think the hope is that, right, these will help these guys stay healthy, and hopefully they know how. But yeah, the top end talent is good enough, I think, to make the playoffs. But can you stay healthy? And on that same note, I'm really curious about the wide receiver position. And the reason I say that is because that's a pretty loaded room. So I'm looking at the guys who stands out that they're like pretty good, as in good enough to maybe trade to get somebody to add to the D-line. So kind of, I think the wide receiver room is fascinating because, and I feel like every year we say, oh, the wide receiver room's stacked, but there's a lot of talent in there, especially if Tim's healthy. So I'm curious to see who fits in that. Yeah, you're good enough to get some trade value and then bring in someone for the D-line. So I think that's kind of a fascinating dynamic that I'm trying to keep an eye on. Don't really have any sense, just yet, but something I think could be a room they could use to subtract from to add to somewhere else.
Yeah, I don't think that they are done potentially wheeling and dealing, making some sort of move at this point in the offseason. They're definitely going to bring in a veteran defensive lineman. I think they've signaled that. Seems pretty clear. But Romi, we'll be talking again soon. There's going to be so much more to talk about. We have 6 straight days back out there, so by this time next week, our opinions will certainly change. But thank you so much for being my guest today on Not Another Bucking Podcast.
Oh man, I had the best time. Before we go, I got to say I loved what Frank Clark said about
yes.
By the way, we forgot to hit that. I loved it. I am sure Broncos fans are on both sides of the coin, but I loved the honesty. I think it was so refreshing that he just went up and he straight up said it, because it's true. You don't want to hear another guy say, "Oh yeah, like we really, we know how they looked at it." I thought that was refreshing. I think that's the kind of leadership presence that they really need, that was lacking. A guy who's won it recently. I kind of think of a KCP, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, a different mentality, but they bring him in. He knows how to win it all. I think that's something that's going to make his presence is invaluable.
Yeah, you brought so many guys in that had one Super Bowl title. We talk about coaching staff, right? Like Sean Payton, a number of the guys that are on the staff now were either players or coaches on the Saints 09 team. Michael Burton, the fullback, won a championship with the Chiefs last year. They've got guys that played in it. But yeah, Frank Clark's the dude. He's got two of those things. And yeah, it's like he's like, I'm not going to pretend I wasn't on the Chiefs kicking their ass for the last 4 years. And the thing I said was crazy is he played for the Chiefs for 4 years.
Yeah.
And yet he was only part of half of this streak of Broncos losing the Chiefs. It is it's got to end. It's mind-boggling. Anyway. Well, Romi, we will definitely have you on again soon. Thank you so much. And to everybody, please subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Also, subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're going to have some bonus content, some post-camp stuff throughout the week in between episodes, so you can catch us there. Until next time, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening.